Welcome to our program, Jon Sweet.
Hey, Daniel, thanks for having me back on the show.
I would like to start with the situation on the Middle East. Israel has launched a ground operation in Lebanon to destroy Hezbollah. What is your assessment on the current situation there?
Yeah, well, the ground operation, I believe what we're seeing right now is you're seeing some special forces, you're seeing dismounted infantry maneuvering across the border. Right now, they're doing a number of things. One is gathering intelligence, correct? Trying to identify those tunnels, trying to identify launch points, cache points where the Hezbollah's strengths are. So I think we're going to continue to see that happen. And concurrently, we're also going to continue to see the strategic airstrikes. And of course, last night and again today and yesterday, you continuously see the Israeli Air Force attacking strong points. When I say strong points, but storage facilities and headquarters within Beirut. So it's an ongoing battle. There's again intelligence gathering. There's actually operations to take out missiles and associated equipment. So it's relentless pressure being put on Hezbollah leadership right now.
What could be the next steps of Israel from your perspective in case of the destroying Hezbollah and in the matter of retaliation to Iran?
Yeah, I'll go back to an article that Mark Toth and I wrote on the subject in which we described what we thought the Israeli strategy is to isolate and destroy individual proxy terrorist organizations and work their way up that ladder till they were able to remove the head off the Hydra. In this case, the Hydra being Iran, and specifically being the Ayatollahs and the mullahs and the IRGC. Look, they successfully isolated and dismantled, for the most part, Hamas. And then once they were able to get them into a position that they were no longer a direct threat, they shifted their focus towards Hezbollah. And then we saw, of course, the pager cell phone attack. And then we've seen the relentless pressure is being applied upon Hezbollah leadership. We've seen 3 leaders of Hezbollah be killed over the course of the past week. So they're isolating Hezbollah as well and removing that proxy, which is the next closest threat to them, the next most immediate threat. And I think once they've got Hezbollah into the same type of situation that they have Hamas, we're going to see them turn their efforts more towards Iran. And what that looks like, obviously that's a great question because it's a much bigger target, but it's also a more capable enemy, both with ballistic missiles versus just rockets and artillery. But they also have a nuclear capability or are developing nuclear capability. So they have options here. One of the options is if there is a strike and everyone's leaning into a possible Iranian or Israeli retaliation, that strike could go after the missile launch sites that Iran has been using, for the last strike where 180 missiles were fired, going after those launch sites, going after the storage facilities where those missiles are, but then also possibly hitting the production plants where these missiles are produced and exported also, to Russia. A second course of action would be to go after Iran's sources of income. That allows them to put, fund, and train their proxies. So you may see some strikes against Iranian oil facilities. The third course of action would be going after those nuclear facilities that we've been talking about, where the enrichment's occurring, and trying to stop that capability, trying to stop the weaponization of nuclear weapons. And then the fourth course of action, which is probably the most dangerous course of action, is trying to evoke some type of regime change, going after Iranian leadership, going after the Ayatollah, going after the mullahs, and going after the senior IRGC officials, and trying to enable the Iranian people to rise up to take their country back. And as you know, there is a crown prince in waiting who's been out of the country for 45 years who would love to have the opportunity to go back to his country.
From your perspective, how can you assess this decapitation strategy of Israel? They have eliminated most of the Hezbollah's leaders. What is your take on this strategy from a military point of view? And would it be effective? Would it be right for Ukraine also to try to use this strategy against the Russian chain of command?
So the strategy, I believe, look, first of all, you have to have a great intelligence architecture in order to identify the leadership. then it has to be even better in order to identify where they specifically are at a specific point to take them out surgically. So yes, you have intelligence gathering capabilities, both electronically, signals intelligence, imagery, but probably personnel within the organization that are reporting back, providing you that type of information. So when you go after a top-down type of organization, and in this case, the Iranian proxies are top-down driven, where commands come from the seniors down to the lower. There's the initiative at the lower echelons doesn't exist without being told when and where to do those attacks. So the Iranian or the Israeli approach to take out the leadership, to fight the leadership versus to take the fight to the individual soldiers on the ground, is a different way of combat. And it seems to be a way that's been somewhat effective, at least with Hamas, is working its way up to Hezbollah. Hezbollah is still firing, right, missiles and direct fire systems. And we just saw a report this morning that Hamas was trying to reorganize in northern Gaza, and that attack was brought down by the Israeli Air Force. Capability still there, but it's an intelligence-driven strategy, and Israel's being very effective at doing it. And let's also understand that it's not just Hezbollah and Hamas. Israel has been very effective at taking out IRGC leadership that has been in Lebanon, that has been in Syria. So it's very effective. Now, how that works with possibly with Russia is a different story. Look, Ukraine's been very effective also in targeting general officers in the Ukraine war. They've been very successful in taking out some of the most senior officers, particularly in Crimea, and threatening Gerasimov when we thought that he may have been involved in it. So they are capable of doing the exact same thing. They have great assets in place and excellent intelligence.
Also, I'd like to cover the situation also in the Middle East. And my final question for you regarding this topic would be, what are the chances for Israel to fully eliminate Hezbollah as a military threat and as a political threat?
As a military threat, it's better. Obviously, you're never going to eliminate the entire organization or the thought process, that methodology, that ideology that they ride behind. We're still fighting ISIS, and we fundamentally destroyed ISIS about 10 years ago. It's the methodology in which they're going about removing those senior leaders that invoke that type of position of killing the infidel, removing Israel from the map, destroying U.S. influence in the region. That's hard, and that comes with change. That's going to be generational change because it's been programmed largely, I believe, into the population. So it's a difficult struggle. Much easier to go after them militarily, but politically they'll have to put something in place if the Hezbollah government collapses, when the Hamas government collapses, that fills that void and tries to change perspective, and that's going to be difficult.
How could this escalation on the Middle East influence the war in Ukraine and situation in our country?
That's a great question. One thing it can do, and I think we're seeing a little bit of that right now, is it can reduce the amount of weapons that Iran is providing to Russia, and Russia in turn is using against the Ukrainian people. And that comes in a form, obviously, the most dangerous weapon are the drones, but also the ballistic missiles that are being provided. So removing that from the battlefield provides Ukraine more opportunities to conduct their operations. Now, what is going to be backfill an Iranian void, and we're seeing it today, is the amount of munitions that are coming in from North Korea. And I believe it's upwards to 3 million rounds that are being tracked as far as coming in to the country and being used on the battlefields. Now, again, 3 million sounds like a lot, and it is a lot. And a lot of those rounds, at least a minority of those rounds are duds, and they're having issues with the rounds too. But Russia's not in a position to be picky. They're taking what's being provided. And right now, the arsenal that's providing it to them is North Korea and Iran. So removing Iran from that calculus certainly favors Ukraine in the short run.
Let's cover also situation in Ukraine and also in the Kursk region. Russian dictator Vladimir Putin previously ordered his troops to liberate Kursk region until the October 1st. However, Russian troops failed to achieve this task, to do that. What is your take on current situation there, and how do you see its influence on the other battlegrounds on the east of Ukraine right now?
Yeah, so right now Russia's fighting with a largely unskilled, untrained, poorly led military. So it's difficult just to assemble. Now, again, we've spoken about this several times, Daniel. The Russian mentality is mass. So they're going to mass infantry, they're going to mass artillery, and they're going to try to get as many tanks, as many armored personnel carriers together, and they're just going to come at you. They're going to come at you, and they're going to come at you. And that's exactly what we're seeing on the battlefields in the Donbass region and the Kursk region. It's just relentless pressure on the Ukrainian defenders, who have been very successful in killing Russians and destroying their equipment. But after a while, that does wear on the defender. You can't help but not have it wear on the defender. But again, this is about mass, and Putin just signed a decree, if I'm not mistaken, a week ago, calling up another 180,000 either reservists or conscripts. So he's just going to continue to put soldiers into uniform, move them to the front, and have them do these, what has been described as human wave or meat assaults, in an effort to wear down the Ukrainian defender. And to date, it hasn't been overly successful. I mean, we have 661,000 casualties on the Russian side, and as long as Ukraine is equipped with the necessary weapons to defend themselves, they'll continue to inflict those type of casualties. But what Ukraine really needs is the ability to interdict those forces before they arrive on the battlefield. And we talk about this all the time, but hitting those forces in Russia before they can assemble, hitting those ammunition depots like we saw last week, before it can be delivered to the artillery tubes. That's how you win the war, not the close fight, but rather defeating the fight that comes tomorrow and the next day.
How do you see the influence of this delay in allowing Ukraine to strike deep inside Russia? How does it influence, how does it shape the battlefields of Ukraine? President Zelensky returned from the United States without this authorization, permission for Ukraine to use long-range strikes. Inside Russia, there are some speculations that this President Biden could allow Ukraine to strike deep inside Russia after the US general election. But how do you see the influence of this delay on the situation in Ukraine?
Well, it does the one thing that most military commanders don't want, and that cedes the initiative to Russia. It allows Russia the ability to dictate conditions on the battlefield and forces Ukraine to react to them, when Ukraine should be, setting the conditions by defeating Russian forces before they arrive on the battlefield. Look, Ukraine is still putting steel on target. And when I say steel on target, I mean they're still doing deep strikes. They're still hitting oil facilities. They're still hitting ammunition facilities. They're still putting relentless pressure on Russian forces in Crimea, but they're doing that with their own weapon systems. Now, we did see, I believe it was yesterday or the day before yesterday, reports that Ukraine was using Storm Shadow and Scout missiles to go after a Russian command post in Ukraine. But what they need to be able to do is to go after those command posts in Russia. So ceding the initiative to the enemy is not a way to win the war. And waiting, and that's the thing that frustrates me, and I'm sure it frustrates many other military professionals, is that you don't wait until an election. You don't wait until the next time we get together. It's you do it now. We live in a world of now. You and I are talking right now on Zoom now. World leaders can get together on Zoom and make these type of decisions. They don't have to gather at one location, a month from now to push a decision another month away, waiting for election outcomes, trying to, if you will, influence votes or gain votes. Just do what's right. You are elected to make decisions, not wait for the public polls to tell you which way to go. And I think that's probably the most frustrating thing for many Americans, right?
Also, there have been some discussions, especially this week, about possible endgame scenario for the war in Ukraine. Some experts said that Ukraine could could get a NATO's membership in exchange of a ceasefire with Russia. How do you see this from a military point of view, and what is your take on that, this possibility of membership in NATO in exchange of a frozen conflict, ceasefire?
I don't think it's very likely for two reasons. One, because Putin said he's not going to accept it, and two, Zelensky said he's not going to cede terrain. So I think that's a non-starting place for negotiations is NATO. Look, at the end of the conflict, Ukraine must be folded into NATO in order to ensure their security for future years. Article 5 has been very effective, for the duration of NATO, and it will continue to be effective to provide that defensive, posture against Russia. But I don't think that that terrain is going to be given. Now, terrain could be given in the form of, we'll give you Kirk's back if you give us the Donbass and Crimea back, and then that may be a negotiating tool, and that may be one of the reasons why Zelensky went into Kursk. That could be a reason. I think it was more along the lines that he saw a weakness and a vulnerability, and he exploited it. But a NATO inclusion is going to have to be part of the solution. Right now, you have two countries in NATO who are against that: Slovakia and Hungary. So something's going to have to be done in order to influence them also.
Also, what is your take on the possible Russia's next steps in the war in Ukraine? What do you expect from the Russian side? And what is your take on the future shape of the battleground?
Yeah, I see the Russia way ahead is exactly what Putin is forecasting. He's building combat power. He's authorized another 180,000. I want to say, I thought last week he authorized another 130. I'm not sure if that was the same report, just a different number. But his intent is just to continue to put Russian soldiers on the battlefield. And look, training isn't an issue. And you read in the papers all the time, this elite unit, that elite unit. There are no more elite units in the Russian military that are fighting in Ukraine. There's elite patches, there's elite numerical designations for organizations, but these units have been decimated. They've been reconstituted on multiple occasions. So you're really just talking about more young Russian and old Russian men in uniforms that 2 weeks ago were on the street or in class. And now today, they're rushing a Ukrainian position. So unfortunately, I think the Russian way ahead is going to be to continue to push into Donbass, to try to contain the advance in the Kursk region, and they're going to try to continue to defend the Crimea Peninsula. And you see they're building defensive mechanisms around the Kerch Street Bridge because they know that that's their lifeline. And if that lifeline goes down, they will be completely isolated on the peninsula, and they won't be able to get to their soldiers. So it's unfortunately, from Russian perspective, it's more the same. So, and that's the battle. What we're going to continue to see, though, is the familiar Russian tactic of we're losing on the battlefield, so therefore we're going to go after Ukrainian civilians and Ukrainian infrastructure. And we're seeing that as they go after town after town after town of no military value, and they're primarily going after Ukrainian civilians and killing them. It's a terror campaign. And quite frankly, it's frustrating to watch as the folks who are responsible for war crimes and investigating them don't seem to be putting up much resistance.
Also, we have seen some reports, and there are some expectations that Ukraine could launch another counteroffensive next year. What would it take for the West to help Ukraine to have successful counteroffensive? And from your perspective, can Ukraine really launch another successful counteroffensive in order to turn the tide of this war?
Yeah. So in my opinion, the answer is yes. But you have to build combat power. Okay. And that means that they're going to have to bring the F-16 on board. We're seeing instances where we believe F-16 fighter jets are being used, but they're going to have the F-16. They're going to have more maneuver capability. And that means they're going to have more tanks. Now, they're getting armored personnel carriers in the form of Bradley infantry fighting vehicles. And as a superb fighting vehicle, as we've seen on the battlefields with the 25 millimeter chain gun that's able to take out Russian T-72 tanks with depleted uranium rounds, a very effective weapon system. But they're going to need artillery. They're going to need that deep strike capability. And as long as that deep strike capability is being contained to within Ukraine, then it would seem logical, at least at some point, that a push would be made towards the Crimean Peninsula to push them out. But in order to be able to do that, they have to stop the Russian advance in the Donbass. And so I think what we're going to see is you're still going to see the push out in the Kursk region, but they're going to have to shore up that potential that potential vulnerability before they can focus another counterattack somewhere else. Fighting 3 fights at one time, major fights, especially when your own soldiers, particularly there was discussion, about a month or two ago, about a possible draft within the Ukraine military. They're dangerously low on that resource, and then not just interjecting that resource, but training that resource to a certain level before you put them on the battlefield. So it's complicated. Let's put it that way. Is it possible? The answer is possible, but they're going to have to shore up Donbass before they can maneuver-wise push into the Crimea Peninsula.
Thank you, Colonel Sweet, for your time and for supporting Ukraine, and glory to Ukraine.
Hey, thank you, Daniel. I appreciate the opportunity to come back on the show.